Welcome, everyone. This is the meeting for an update on the city's community impact study for the proposed 76er sports arena. So just to clarify, there are many studies and efforts to understand local impact right now around this project. This is the only community impact study that the city is managing, and this study is not related to the 76er studies. The developer is paying for this study, but they do not have any influence on the study. My name is Sarah Young. I'm a member of the team led by BGH Advisors, and I will be your host for tonight. Before the consultant team presents on their findings and approach, I'd like to turn it over to Ian Litwin from Department of Planning and Development for the City of Philadelphia to give a short recap of all of the city's studies on this project.
Good evening, everyone. Before we get started, I just wanted to share that the Q&A will be open. There's going to be 4 pauses in the presentation for questions. You'll be able to comment on other people's questions and upvote them, but the chat will be closed. And to get started, I'm going to do a quick presentation outlining all of the city's due diligence that we're doing around the 76ers arena. Uh, 76 DevCo, a development partnership connected to the Philadelphia 76ers, has proposed building a new privately funded arena on Market Street in Center City. The City of Philadelphia and its nonprofit economic development partner, the Philadelphia Industrial Development Corporation, or PIDC, have been working to determine whether and how a new downtown arena could benefit all of Philadelphia. When we say benefit all of Philadelphia, what do we mean? So we have 5 points. The first being the protection for Chinatown. First and foremost, Philadelphia's historic Chinatown must be protected. Chinatown continues to provide a supportive and thriving environment for the Asian American Pacific Islander community that is a fundamental part of the city's cultural and economic fabric. Second is that the arena must lead to more money for city services and schools. The new arena project must provide increased tax dollars for Philadelphia and the school district, Philadelphia, and the state. The third is that an additional arena must maintain the health of the South Philadelphia Sports Complex. The current sports complex in South Philly must remain economically viable if the proposed arena is built in Center City. The 76ers would also be required to sign a 30-year commitment. This will be a binding agreement to remain in and play all home games in Philadelphia for the next 30 years. And lastly, the city wants to ensure a diverse workforce. So 76 DevCo must commit to building and operating the arena with a diverse workforce. So the city has been undergoing a due diligence process, as we do with all development projects. However, this one is much larger. So we've hired a team of expert consultants to best understand and assess the proposed arena's impact. The Philadelphia Industrial Development Corporation managed this request for proposal process for selecting the consultants and incorporated input from the community to specify what the consultants have been asked to accomplish. There are 4 consultant teams: economic impact, traffic impact, design, and community impact. On economic impact, the city hired CSL. CSL is a national firm that has provided financial analysis on more than a dozen professional sports arenas. CSL is working with the city's finance office to calculate construction costs, projected taxes associated with construction and operations, and other revenues, expenses, financial feasibility, and the capability of Philadelphia to support 2 professional sports arenas in 2 different locations. On traffic analysis, it's worth noting that the financial analysis will be completed before the end of this year. Traffic analysis, the city has retained engineering firm JMT. JMT has assisted the city's Office of Transportation, Infrastructure, and Sustainability and the Streets Department with projects over the last several years. JMT and the city, along with PennDOT and SEPTA, are working to evaluate the impact the arena would have on traffic, public transportation, parking, and pedestrians. This is an ongoing effort that will be ongoing up and until if and when the arena is built. On design, the city has hired the team of Convergent Design, who are national experts on arena design, and Philadelphia architects and planners, the Ian Smith Design Group, to provide on-call support to the Philadelphia City Planning Commission. The consultants are focused on how aspects of the proposed design would affect the public realm and public spaces. These include the facades, entrances, access to retail, pedestrian experience, crowd circulation, and impact on Jefferson Station, which is located beneath the proposed arena site. Like the traffic consultants, this is an ongoing contract, and they will be providing services on an ongoing basis. On community impact, the team that's here tonight is a team that consists of National Real Estate Advisory and Planning firm BJH Advisors, Sojourner Consulting, a Philadelphia-based firm with a track record of engaging immigrant-based populations, Economic Development Consultants, Urban Partners, Research Consultants, Dr. Susanna Laramie Kidd and Maureen Hume, and Environmental Planning and Engineering Consultants, AKRF. All these consultants have been selected to analyze and report on how the arena would impact Chinatown and other neighborhoods near the proposed site. We expect this study to be completed before the end of the year. Lastly, at various points in Chinatown's history, the city government has supported, proposed, and even carried out nearby development projects without taking into account the significance of Chinatown, Market East, and Washington Square West neighborhoods and the perspectives of the community. Today, the city recognizes these past failures and is committed to truly listening and learning from the community. The consultant team will now give you an update on their progress to date, and we will welcome feedback from you in the Q&A. Thank you.
Ian, Arthur, would you put up the slides for the consultant team, please? As I said before, my name is Sarah Young, and I'm the principal of Sojourner Consulting. I'm a member of the team led by BJH Advisors. And here with me today is Isaac Kwan, principal at Urban Partners, who's responsible for the local economic development analysis of the project. Susanna Laramie Kidd, who is an ethnographer and cultural planner and responsible for crafting the methodology alongside Dr. Lorraine Hom, who's not here tonight. And I'll pass it to Kei Hayashi from BJH Advisors to introduce her team.
Sorry, I was on mute. Hi, my name is Kei Hayashi. I'm the principal and founder of BJH Advisors. We're pleased to be presenting to the community today, and I'm joined by Yamali Duroso, who is our internal project manager, and Arthur Samuel, who will be presenting some key statistics. Thank you.
Thanks, Kei. We are really honored to be conducting an assessment of this historic and culturally significant neighborhood alongside Chinatown, Calla Hill, and Chinatown North. And we hope that our study will help provide the city with the information that they need to help them make decisions around the proposed project. Arthur, would you move to the next slide? Today, we're going to divide our presentation into three parts to reflect the different components of the final report. First, we'll give you some background on our overall approach, as well as the study area of the report. Second, we will share what is in the study area, how it's changed, and this will constitute the scenario in which there is no arena. And so thinking about a future without the arena, what would that look like for the study area? And then finally, we will show you how we're going to determine impact if there is an arena project in the study area. We haven't yet completed this third and final phase of our work, and so today we'll just be showing the methodology and the approach. After each section, we'll have time for questions and feedback, and we'll also have a time at the end for questions and comments. We ask that you please save arena-related questions and discussions for part 3 once we talk about methodology. And next slide, please. Next slide. Before we dive into the study approach, I just wanted to let you know that there are some media here tonight, since this issue is of interest to the whole city and not just to the study area. The meeting will also be recorded, and the recording and the slide deck will be shared and accessible with the public after this presentation. So looking at the study approach, as I said, we are comparing two possible futures in the study area. The first is what happens if the arena is not built, and we'll understand this by looking at the existing conditions and trends. The second is to project a future for what happens in the study area if the project is built. And just to establish the timeline of the proposal, there's an estimated 2026 start date and a 2031 completion date. Next slide. In Chinatown North, Callow Hill, and Chinatown Core, which I'll refer to tonight as simply Chinatown, we're using a little bit of a different approach from the rest of the study area, which we're calling systems thinking. And systems thinking is a school of thought that simply says that everything is connected. If an event affects a resident, it will also likely affect businesses as well as services and institutions in a neighborhood, for example. System thinking is used in complex entities and situations. For example, climate change is a prime example of where systems thinking is applied. We're using it to think about Chinatown because that is the way that the community has always viewed itself and voiced its understanding of itself, and also because it helps us understand the role of culture. And finally, we developed this approach collaboration with Chinatown community members. Next slide. This is a map of the study area. It's made out of 3 neighborhoods. Chinatown North, Callow Hill is the census tract to the north, Chinatown Core in the middle, and then to the south, Market East and Washington Square West, where the proposed arena project is located between 10th and 11th Street and Market and Cuthbert. Just to note that Washington Square West, while its RCO boundaries overlap Market East, the neighborhood itself is technically not within the study area. We did not collect desktop research or census and demographic and socioeconomic data on the neighborhood, but we did include the neighborhood in 2 focus groups and an interview. So we'll share some of those findings later. Next slide. So over the past 3 months, we've been collecting information from the study area. How have we done this? We've talked to a lot of folks. We've talked to almost 200 people, Chinese, Spanish, and English. We have done 19 focus groups in those 3 languages, as well as 25 interviews. We've collected 3 types of surveys. The first is travel surveys to understand local travel habits, street surveys to understand what visitor habits and destinations are on the sidewalks, and then finally surveys of small businesses. Survey work has been focused in the Chinatown area. We also collected information about every property and business in the Chinatown area, and we looked up information in large proprietary and public databases around the entire study area. We tried to focus our research on groups that aren't usually represented, like immigrants and people of color. We also tried to understand how neighborhood changes impact community members. Next slide. A brief history of the neighborhoods in the study area. Chinatown was founded as an immigrant community in 1870, went through a period of urban renewal in the 1960s to the 2000s, which has affected its built environment today. Callow Hill emerged in the 1990s as a distinct area, and in the 2000s, this neighborhood experienced increasing displacement pressures from increasing property values. In recent years, it's been the first to be impacted from the pandemic, as well as the last to recover. And in the future, the neighborhood looks forward to a potential capping of the Vine Street Expressway. Next slide. Here in Market East and Washington Square West, Market East was our original retail corridor of the city, originally an outdoor market and then turned middle-class retail corridor. It also houses some of our oldest and largest hospitality and health institutions. In Washington Square West, we have similar key historic assets. It's experienced transformation over the last 50 years from a working class neighborhood to one of the highest income neighborhoods in the city while retaining a very intimate and small town feel. And finally, it houses the neighborhood of Philadelphia, and it remains a center for LGBTQ+ community members. Next slide. So we'd love to get your thoughts about this overall approach. If you have any questions before we proceed into our findings of the current conditions in the study area. You can drop any questions in the question and answer box or any comments there. Okay, hearing none, I will move on. We do have a lot to get through, so I'm sure there will be plenty of questions later. Next slide. Okay, so now we're going to talk about how the study area has changed and what's there right now. First, we'll present Chinatown, and then we'll talk about Market East and Washington Square West. Just to note that the scope of the project is focused on the Chinatown area, but we have included Market East and Washington Square West in all of the desktop research and in some of the focus group and survey research. Next slide.
Okay, so here are the demographics of Chinatown. So this is the population in 2011 and 2021. It grew by 80%, and overall the population became more diverse in Chinatown. And here is the median household income from 2011 to 2021. And as you can see, the median household income increased by 113% in Chinatown.
Just to share a few driving factors behind that demographic growth and diversity, both demand and supply factors have been at play here. So on the left, as the study area has becomes a more desirable place and becomes seen as a more desirable place to live, folks have flocked there. There's been an increase in businesses and jobs that have driven more residents there as well. Jefferson students and medical residents have seen it as an affordable and convenient place to live. There's been an increase in the Asian and Latino immigration overall in the city and population, and they've continued to grow in this area. And then finally, there's been an increase in the diversity of Asians. So bringing in not only the historically Cantonese, Chinese immigrants in the neighborhood, but also other ethnic groups. On the supply side, there's been a huge building boom in this neighborhood, supported by neighborhood rezoning in 2013 that allowed for increased density. And then most of those new units have taken place on the north side of Vine Street in Caleb Hill, Chinatown North. Next slide. Chinatown has also become more of a regional hub. While it was always a regional hub, it's become more of a hub for services and programs in the last 10 years. And a survey that we conducted on the street showed that many people are frequent visitors, visiting at least once a week, or some of them visiting at least 3 times a week. There's been an increase in community serving groups, especially in health. 23 new establishments since 2014. And we also learned from a survey of affordable housing in the area, outside of the study area, but in the Center City area, that there are 662 Asian seniors who have chosen to locate here due to the proximity of Chinatown. Chinatown has also become a destination for youth, and they named the Crane Community Center and Chinese Christian Church and Center as two important destinations for them. All of this really goes to counteract the national narrative of Chinatown's diminishing and becoming smaller and less important to the region. This is important to note because our Chinatown, in contrast, is growing and is diversifying in terms of the people that find it valuable, but still maintaining that cultural identity. And it's also becoming younger. Next slide.
Thanks, Sarah. One of the ways that the Philadelphia Chinatown is serving as a regional hub is focused on small businesses and also employment among the Asian American and Chinese American community. Since 2014, we did a survey of what businesses have started and what continued, and some have closed. But overall, there's been a net increase of 178 businesses located in Chinatown, a 47% growth. It's a center of employment for immigrants and people who don't speak English, for Asians and Latinos that work and find employment in Chinatown. And large numbers of workers commute from the Northeast and South Philadelphia increasingly. So when you look at people that drive in or take public transit into Chinatown for work, a considerable portion of that labor pool is from those two neighborhoods, in addition to Chinatown and adjacent neighborhoods. As Sarah mentioned, the street survey that we conducted, one of the top reasons, as you can imagine, for people to visit Chinatown was to enjoy a variety of different kind of eating and drinking establishments, so restaurants, and visiting other businesses located in Chinatown was the top reason for visitors. Next slide.
So moving on to some trends that are challenges in Chinatown, the neighborhood overall has experienced much more traffic and demand for parking. At the same time, there's been less supply of that parking. And on the left, there are various reasons for more demand, including construction, more businesses and services, residents, food delivery, double parking that results from food delivery and takeout, less public transit use overall, and also the traffic impacts that come from Vine and Market Street, which bisects Chinatown and act as a barrier to enter if there's traffic. On the supply side, lots and garages continue to be developed in the neighborhood. They also don't utilize all of the spaces due to a couple factors. The increased parking costs and pricing increases have continued to turn away regular visitors and customers. And there's also a lack of reliable transit access for a lot of folks that are coming into the neighborhoods from where they are. Next slide. Based on the travel survey of when and how community members are getting in and out of the neighborhood, we learned that COVID-19 health and safety are still major factors for how people are choosing to travel in terms of their mode. Many people are avoiding public transit and choosing to drive or carpool. Busiest travel times were during weekday evenings from 5 to 8, as well as on weekends, especially on Sunday. And this is mostly a driving community, with the exception of seniors, youth, and some workers. Next slide. And this map here just shows the study area, and particularly Chinatown is a major hub for transit, but it is also wrapped inside major roads and highways, particularly Vine Street, Market, and Broad as local arteries in the city. Next slide.
One of the deep analytical tasks that we did was to look at property taxes by property for the study area in Chinatown, as well as ownership of properties. And our research indicated that nearly half of properties in Chinatown are Asian owned, 45%. So it's held steady for the last 10 years or so. But there's evidences of investment from offsite owners from all over the region and even all over the country. One of the things that we've heard frequently in our community outreach was the difficulty with rising property taxes. So since 2014, when the city had initiated the actual value initiative, there was an initial big jump in taxes. But since 2014, however, taxes have continued to rapidly grow and increase. So commercial properties increased by 64%, and mixed-use properties were slightly going a little bit faster than that at 66%. And from our conversations, we've heard that businesses in these mixed-use properties are most impacted, and the first to be impacted by tax increases. So, as opposed to residential portion of these mixed-use properties. Next slide.
So, building on what Isaac just said, the median home value within Chinatown increased by 49%, and leading to increase in rent and displacement of low-income immigrants, and the lack of affordable housing for new working class families has gone up, and the prices new property owners have increased rent to focus more on profit and left low-income immigrants out to dry.
Another trending challenge in this neighborhood is safety. And here it has more of a cultural context, as Chinatown is a home and destination for immigrants, people who don't speak English, and Asians who all see themselves as more vulnerable. For them, the neighborhood is a safe place from risks like gun violence, which is not common in China and other countries of origin, as well as the recent anti-Asian violence that increased during the pandemic. The 6th Police District, which was previously located in the neighborhood, has relocated. And after it's left, community members perceive more crime, especially property damage and theft. Generally, the increase in the folks they see as outsiders from other neighborhoods, folks who are not reflective of the cultural identity, are seen as creating risk for these people. And this is mainly because of a lack of the ability to navigate whether or not somebody means ill intention towards them. Next slide. There are many other concerns around safety, including the shortening of sidewalk hours due to fewer pedestrians since the pandemic, an increase in homeless individuals and people with mental health and drug addiction issues, and then the continued lack of active storefronts outside of the main business corridors caused by projects such as Convention Center and the Fashion District. Next slide. And this slide here just shows that during the pandemic, small businesses in Chinatown were particularly weakened. On the left, by a myriad of costs that increased, and on the right, showing the diminishing opportunities to earn profit. Next slide. In the street survey that we conducted, we asked people what would cause them to leave Chinatown or to stop returning to Chinatown. And people responded that businesses were a major destination, and 2 out of 3 said they would do this if their favorite businesses shut down. And almost half of them said that if it does not feel safe, they would also change their visitation behavior. Next slide. So just to recap this section on existing conditions in Chinatown, Chinatown is still Chinatown. It's still a living cultural community. This is very unique in a national sense, and it's also unique in the city of Philadelphia. It has changed. It's gone through many changes, but it's reinvented itself thanks to new residents, new immigrants, new community members coming in and taking over key roles as business owners and service providers. It's unique in the city for the way that it's developed, even as it's seen an increase in offerings for higher income people. It also continues to offer benefits for people across the spectrum and for historically marginalized communities. And as I mentioned earlier, this is a very different narrative from other historic Chinatowns, which are mostly struggling to define a role for themselves in their cities. Here, although there are other areas of Asian concentrations of residents and businesses, this Chinatown has defined a unique role for itself. Small businesses and low-income residents, however, remain vulnerable to displacement pressures in the future. Next slide. Thinking about a future for Chinatown without the arena, it looks hopeful. Chinatown can continue to grow as it has and can continue to benefit not only a diversity of people in the neighborhood, but also regionally. The next 60 years, it can focus on public projects like Vine Street Expressway, which will divide the community, or I'm sorry, reconnect the community rather than dividing, as we saw in the urban renewal era. The Vine Street Cap, one of those projects, will be really transformative and require work to make sure that it benefits everybody that is currently there. New community members can be brought into the fold, and community building can be done to enable them to grow into leadership roles. And there are a couple of key areas that Chinatown would do well to pay attention to, including safety, public transit, offering parking, and supporting small businesses. Next slide. So here I know, even though we're not in the Chinatown community meeting, I want to make sure we're covering any questions about this section, as well as any questions that collected over the first section that were not answered. I think Ian and Stephanie, if you could just let us know which questions have risen to the top.
One of the someone wants us to go back to slide 14, if we can do that, and then we can move on to the other questions.
Was there a question about the slide?
No, it seems like someone just missed it, but I guess whatever. I mean, I guess the point of this slide is the growth in income in Chinatown. And then we got a couple other questions. The first one is, I'd like to know what is the decision of deciding that the boundary of Wash West is Chestnut Street, the Paco line goes on Locust Street, and we had another person ask the same question, and 3 upvotes on that.
The boundaries were census tract driven.
Thank you. So I would say that just because the boundaries are driven by census tracts, it doesn't mean that we're not considering the input of people who live or work south of Chestnut Street. Another question, can you tell us if the coalition was part of the research, specifically in regard to their presentation of history related to PHL and Chinatowns across the US?
No, I think the person is referring to the Anti-Arena Coalition. They were not part of the research, although they were part of the review of the application scope, and they did suggest that we include a section dedicated to urban renewal for Chinatown, which we are doing in the final report.
Yes, and there was a number of community members who gave us input into the final scope of this. Um, Sarah, can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So during the application process, the team presented an application with a draft scope in response to the request for proposals that the city put out. And so in that process, there was a small committee of community members that reviewed our application and made very detailed comments. And we tried to be responsive to all of those comments as possible. And we ended up making a series of changes in our scope to add additional scope items, such as urban renewal.
Thank you. So a question on income. How does the income track versus Philly as a whole? I think this is in reference to slide 14.
Arthur can step in, but my recollection is that the income of the study area was slightly higher than Philadelphia as a whole. Is that right, Arthur?
Yes, that is right.
Thank you. Then we have a couple of questions about Washington Square West, and if we did the same study for Wash West. I think we're going to discuss Wash West next. Is that correct, Sarah?
Yes, we are going to discuss Wash West. As I said at the top of the presentation, we stopped the study area at Chestnut Street, but we did interview and include in focus groups, residents and businesses who lived south of Chestnut Street. So we'll include some of those findings in the next section.
Thank you. So there's a couple questions on traffic. I think I could take these. The question is that they don't see any data on traffic patterns and congestion, and also the traffic impact on the Jefferson Hospital. So the project sponsors, 76 DevCo, have submitted a traffic impact study to the city. They've actually redone the entire study at the city's request, and we're now reviewing that. JMT was hired to assist the city in that process. So there was going to be some back and forth between the city and the Sixers on that study. In terms of impact on Jefferson Hospital, they're commissioning their own study specifically on ambulance circulation. So some of that is ongoing, and we haven't received the study from Jefferson yet. But the traffic impact is being studied under a different process, and a very specific one involving SEPTA, PennDOT, and the city. And the last question that is still remaining, did you look at the theater district in Wash West? How will that be impacted when there are shows as well as a game or concert going on at the same time? And then plus Reading Terminal Market, swells, and conventions. We've met with the leadership of Reading Terminal Market and the Convention Center. One thing that is kind of surprising is that when there's large conventions, other than the flower show and car show, the convention center doesn't typically attract many cars. And so if and when this arena is approved, there will be an agreement between the city and the 76ers. And we could potentially block out certain days when they can't have events, specifically for the car and flower show. We did not specifically look at the theater districts in Wash West. And Reading Terminal Market does have concerns, but the vast majority of their users do not drive. And then on the question about discussion of arenas in other cities, that is coming up later in this presentation.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next section, which is focused on Market East and Washington Square West then. And we'll here we'll again go over the current conditions and trends in this neighborhood.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So here's also the population of Market East. So as you can see, the population increased by 41%, overall growing and remaining diverse as it was before in 2011 to 2021. And here's a little bit more information about the housing. in Market East. So in 2018, East Market, a mixed-use redevelopment, had 562 rental apartments, which transformed the neighborhood, by affecting medium income to increase by 68%. The number of households increased by 73%, and 95% of housing units were rented occupied, which also impacted the neighborhood as a whole with significant development and growth.
So again, in terms of recent trends in Market East and Wash West, there's been an expansion and a strengthening of large business institutions. PA Convention Center expanded in 2011, and this enabled them to hold more than one event at a time and compete with other large convention centers nationally. Jefferson University Hospital also became more integrated as a business, and it moved its administrative headquarters to 11th and Market Street and has gone through a series of development of medical buildings to expand its campus. Reading Terminal Market has expanded its hours into the evening for large private events that do attract a number of people. And of course, the gallery completed its redevelopment into the fashion district right before the pandemic hit. In Washington Square West, Midtown Village became, it emerged as a new small business district. And it was distinguished by boutique and independent businesses, and in part catalyzed by the local property developer Goldman. And all of these businesses are driving a lot of foot traffic and making the neighborhood more of a destination for visitors. Next slide. In this neighborhood, we also saw many challenges related to the pandemic and recovery from the pandemic. Here, the narrative was a little bit more conflicting. There were some clear interests in terms of independent and neighborhood interests versus corporate or institutional interests. The larger institutions are more invested in the overall visitor experience in the neighborhood, as well as the city as a whole. And so they're more sensitive to the perception of the city as a good place to visit. And safety is very important in that. The increase in homeless individuals, while it happened overall in Center City, was received a little differently here on the east side compared to the west side because of the overall lack of pedestrian activity. Those individuals are much more visible and apparent. Safety and crime and the presence of homeless and people with mental issues or drug addiction issues has been a huge concern. Retail theft has been a rising concern related to crime. As an example, in response to that, the Fashion District recently instituted a curfew for minors at 2 p.m. to help curb large groups of minors that they felt were behaving inappropriately in a mall setting. The concern around safety has also led to the rise of private security forces for large institutions. All of the large institutions have their own staff, security staff. Those folks can't enforce the law, but they coordinate with each other and with the Philadelphia Police Department, as well as with homeless outreach workers. Some of the efforts to outreach to the homeless individuals might have the effect of moving those people to other places. In addition, the closure of Hahnemann Hospital also relocated many of these homeless individuals to receive services at Jefferson, and so this may also be a contributing factor. Washington Square West in particular had never experienced a significant homeless population or visible crime on the street, but this is something that they're seeing for the first time in the last few years. Traffic for retail and restaurant businesses has not fully come back yet. Retail is looking at how to adapt to the shift in the market and placing more experience-based tenants. in properties. Some of food establishments are, similarly shifting their business models and becoming more dependent on takeout and delivery traffic. However, as the office traffic has declined, so has the safety and cleanliness of SEPTA, and this has had an impact on visitors as well. Washington Square West, in particular, feels like its neighborhood character and community networks are declining. Residents feel like there's been a lot of development here, but that the promise of development to benefit the entire neighborhood has not been realized. And the neighborhood has seen a big increase in larger luxury projects in particular. All of this construction and development has impacted quality of life, which was a key concern identified in focus groups. There's less parking, more trash, and construction closures are so frequent that it's made the streets hard to navigate. Affordability of housing was also a key concern, especially for renters. And as rents have increased by quite a lot, and there's more speculative homeownership, residents have noticed the displacement or the relocation of long-time residents or renters not being able to afford to purchase and therefore moving out of the neighborhood. Everyone agrees that more intentionality is needed in terms of new planned development. Next slide. So to summarize this section around existing conditions, Market East has set out with a number of goals based on the 2009 Neighborhood Strategic Plan that was put out by the city. And it's met a number of those goals, especially boosted by East Market project and the transformation of that section of Market Street. However, it still has many challenges relating to safety and pedestrian activity. And it still remains a dividing force in that area, dividing neighborhoods rather than connecting them. In particular, the large institutions create a lot of pedestrian dead zones in the immediate area. So convention center, for example, most of that activity is inside of the building, and it creates a lack of active storefronts, which causes a sense that there's less activity and vitality in that area. Overall, there's a patchwork of different uses, and it's very clear when you walk through the neighborhood, when you're entering into more of an institutional zone like Jefferson versus more of a neighborhood zone where there's more of an intimate scale, more active street uses, and shorter blocks. However, the neighborhood character does persist because of the level of commitment of residents to the neighborhood. People love living here, people love being connected to each other, and they want to continue to work on the neighborhood. Next slide. Thinking about the future of this neighborhood without an arena, there's clearly some key gaps to be addressed in the Market East neighborhood, in particular the pedestrian environment and safety, to create more of a sense of connectivity between neighborhoods. As retail continues to struggle, there's an opportunity to create more diversity in that retail landscape on Market Street. However, the small businesses and mixed-use corridors are our current bright spot, and they can continue to grow and become a positive influence on the entire area. Without support and intervention, however, higher-end residential and business development is going to continue to add to displacement pressures and squeeze people out of the neighborhood who are vulnerable to those pressures. Next slide. So here, we really want to make sure that we're confirming this information with you as members of the community. This will set a baseline for the team as we move into thinking about the impact on the study area. So we want to understand if this feels like a complete presentation, understanding that we've just shared the high level with you, if it feels true to your experience as a community member, if there's any areas that surprise you that you don't expect to see, and if there's anything that's missing that you think we should ask. And these are all areas that we'll act upon if we can, or note as a limitation in our final report.
Yeah, Sarah. Well, there's a number of questions about Reading Terminal Market. Can you expand on the conversation we had about parking and their events that they have in the evening?
Yeah, so Reading Terminal, we interviewed Reading Terminal and other large institutions in Market East. Reading Terminal in particular said that there was a diversity of ways that people get to the market, from public transit to using the nearby garages with whom they have parking agreements. There's also folks that are walking there. In the evening, they noted that they've been expanding into events, private events that take over the market. I think they mentioned those could be up to 2,000 people at a time. And for those events as well, there's a diversity of ways that folks are getting there. There was also some concern around loading and conflicts with vendor loading, construction suppliers and vendors that are constantly coming in and out of the market. Were there any other questions about Reading Terminal Market, or is there another question?
I'm sorry, Reading Terminal Market. There's a merchant. Our customers definitely drive, and they buy more when they drive. Making it less convenient to drive and park is definitely going to impact our bottom lines. Someone else in the market mentioned the 200 night events, and I think you expanded on that. We have another question. Will we be discussing environmental impact in this project in the sense of demolition, construction, and the use of the project after it's built?
Do you want me to take that, Ian, or save it for later? This isn't a formal environmental impact statement or environmental review, as you may be referring to. This is a community impact assessment, and we talk in a little bit, actually, I think in the next section, about how our approach, what our approach to measuring impact is, and hopefully that will answer your question.
Thank you. We got a question from Jeff Gamage at the Inquirer. On a slide, you described the Washington Square West neighborhood character as under threat. Can you explain what that means specifically?
Sure. So neighborhood character is a little bit fuzzy of a term, but generally I think it refers to how the community members feel about their neighborhood, how they perceive its identity and local culture. In Wash Square West, people really felt that the neighborhood used to be a village. People used to know each other. It felt like there was a lot of relationships between residents and small businesses, that people would go out into the streets and be able to have conversations. All of the construction and development in the past 10 years has been a disruption to that, partly because of the activity itself has been very disruptive, but also because of the types of development that have come online. So these are larger luxury construction projects, conversions of commercial buildings into residential projects. There's been less amenities because of this, so less parking. There's also been more visible trash on the street, and less care taken on the street as well. So these are all intangible factors, as well as more concrete evidence of these changes that the residents brought up. I'll also say that when we spoke to the Midtown Village businesses, they were very proud of the independent character of that corridor. It really felt like it was a very distinct characteristic of that corridor, similar to Chinatown. These are not corporate brands. They are owned by individuals, and really nurtured by local residents and Philadelphia pride.
Thank you. We got a message from Andy Allman. She runs the Reading Terminal Market to consider including the Reading Terminal on our maps. And also, from a volume perspective, they get over 5 million shopping visits per year. Are we including
Great,
impact on
thanks, Annie.
SEPTA? Lots of bus routes are along Market Street. So SEPTA is meeting with the 76ers, and the 76ers traffic impact study will also include impacts on SEPTA's bus routes. There's also a question about regional rail before and after games. This study is not looking at that. SEPTA is working on that separately with the Sixers. There's also access to the Market Frankfurt L and Paco at this site too. Can you please elaborate on, to paraphrase, if there's no assistance provided, high-end commercial and residential will squeeze out existing residents? What are we saying, and what is this assistance?
I think that slide was just to note that there's been a trend of higher end development. And again, this was about Washington Square West, where we did not collect desktop research. So there wasn't demographic information. So this was all qualitative information collected from focus groups and interviews. But what we heard from residents was that there's been more high-end development, which has had a tangible impact on their neighbors who they've seen leave or be forced out of their homes because of development.
Thank you. Someone asked about businesses on Walnut and Chestnut and how we have not mentioned them specifically.
We did not do any interviews or focus groups with those businesses. We did one focus group with the Midtown Village businesses, which I'm actually not sure if they include businesses on Walnut or Chestnut, but I know they're mainly located on 13th between Chestnut and Locust.
Okay, I think the remaining questions we have are better suited for the next pause, so I think we should move on. They're still open in the Q&A, and we'll get to them after the next pause. Thank you.
In this section, we are going to go over our approach to how we determine impact with the arena. So we start with project understanding, which we'll show you in a second. And then we walk through our methodology, which contains 3 approaches. One is to examine case studies. A second is to analyze the community through the concept of tipping points. And a third is to analyze key themes that came out of the community outreach. And we will talk about each of these in a few minutes. Next slide, please. This slide summarizes our high-level project assumptions, which we received from a PIDC and the sponsor. Construction start date of 2026, completion of the arena in 2031. Sports team, currently the 76ers, capacity of 18,500 seats, square footage about 823,000. The project will include retail development at the street level. It will also include a residential tower of approximately 335,000 square feet, about 150 annual events, 40% of those NBA games and 60% other, and peak traffic hours 1 hour before and after events, which will mostly be weekday evenings and weekends. The next slide goes into our first approach, which is case studies. This we settled on because there have been robust environmental assessments and environmental impact statements around the country for similar projects. So we reviewed possible case study comparisons and selected 3, which I'll summarize on the next slide. We looked at both the temporary and permanent impacts projected from the environmental impact statements for the other arenas. And then we embellished the lit review research that we did with looking at actual impacts currently. Where were the projections versus where the neighborhoods are today in terms of key statistics? So on the next slide, it is just a summary of our selection criteria. We were looking at arenas in dense population areas, enclosed arenas of approximately the same size, arenas that hosted multiple events, including anchor teams as well as other events. And we also were looking at arenas that had gone through an environmental impact statement or review. The impacts that we looked at through those EIS reviews were both temporary and permanent, and the comparisons will be summarized in our final report. The next slide goes over the case studies that we selected. The Golden One Center in Sacramento, the Capital One Arena in Washington, D.C., and the Barclays Center in Brooklyn. And the next slide just summarizes very high level. It's a table of the location, the square footage. They're all approximately the same size, with Capital One being slightly larger at 1 million square feet and the Golden One slightly smaller at about 700,000 square feet. Most of them did actually contain additional ancillary development besides the arena. And the other thing that we noted is that both Barclays and Capital One were a part of a larger master planning process where the arena was an anchor tenant in an economic development strategy proposed by the host cities. The next slide, Sarah will take on, which is our second approach to analyzing impacts.
Okay. So we have, based on the systems approach, identified 4 tipping elements in the Chinatown neighborhood. We can think of this if you've ever played the game of Jenga, which is a set of building blocks stacked on top of each other. You remove a block until eventually the whole thing collapses. Blocks, which are the weak points, which are connected to many of the other blocks that are also weak, and would cause the whole tower to collapse, would be the tipping points elements here. So if these points see enough negative impact, it's a sign that the whole community would experience significant change. Next slide. And so to give you an example of how that cascading effect happens in Chinatown now, because the system is so interconnected, right now, something common that happens is that a new hopeful restaurant opens in the neighborhood. Directly, this attracts more people that want to buy cultural products. It creates more jobs for a unique labor pool for immigrant and people who don't speak English. On a sector level, it creates more value for all of the other commercial tenants in Chinatown, and more of those businesses are able to open. On a land use level, property owners see that creates value for those types of tenants. They continue to rent similar tenants when there's a vacancy in their building. And then finally, at a community level, Chinatown is seen as a strong cultural community. This in turn attracts more residents who value that identity, more visitors who value those products, and more services who want to cater to the residents and visitors who are in the neighborhood. So that's how the system is connected, and an example of one input on a typical basis. Next slide. Going back to our tipping points, this is an example of how if a tipping point element is impacted enough, it could create change throughout the system. So one of our tipping points was around safety. So if we were to determine that the arena would cause safety concerns for pedestrians, this might cause residents and visitors who have those safety concerns to either move out of the neighborhood or choose not to move into the neighborhood. As a result, Chinatown would be perceived to not have that gateway function for new immigrants anymore, or for that Asian residential base. And property owners would begin to see that loss of value to renting to those types of tenants, and they might rent to other types of tenants when there is a vacancy, or even redevelop and sell their properties to another individual. At the community level, if the residents and the visitors choose to go somewhere else, then the workers are weakened for small businesses, the membership base is weakened for services and institutions, and then businesses and those community-based services would start to gravitate towards other places and eventually relocate their main headquarters to those places or relocate their locations there. Next slide. To give you another example of how a tipping point might create change, parking and transportation issues was also identified as a tipping point. So if these issues were to lead to a net loss for cultural businesses, then this might result in those businesses leaving or choosing to open somewhere else in the city. As a result, Chinatown might be seen as having a declining appeal. It's no longer a good place to go for those businesses, and there's fewer and fewer of them, and visitors would start going somewhere else. As a result, on the land use level, property owners would see that declining value in this pool of potential tenants, and they would begin to rent to other businesses that don't cater to this cultural group, or they would redevelop or sell their properties. And at the community level, residents who value the products that these cultural businesses provide might leave. Services and programs might see less visitors and less membership because not as many people are coming into the neighborhood for these purposes. And eventually they would follow their users to wherever they have relocated. Slide. So that was the tipping point approach. The third and final approach is the key theme analysis. And these are 4 categories that we'll use to summarize and filter the information that we've learned from all of the community members that we've spoken to. Socioeconomic conditions includes both the residents and small businesses in the neighborhood. Community facilities includes assets like cultural centers, public assets like fire stations. Historic and cultural assets typically include more building and property focused assets, but here we will concentrate on intangible cultural heritage, since that's a core asset for Chinatown. And then finally, we'll look at all of these things together and how they contribute to kind of the intangible nature of neighborhood character in the study area. So we will take the information that we've collected from all of our efforts, and however we are able to analyze it through these themes and overlay the assumptions of the project, we'll come up with some analysis for each theme. Next slide. So to recap this section, we have introduced 3 ways that we're going to use to determine impact. The first is case studies and looking at reports of other projects in cities where we applied certain criteria that was comparable to our context. Second is tipping points and understanding where the weak points are that might lead to significant damage and what that might be. And then finally, a key themes analysis, thinking about the other topics that were identified and how they might be relevant according to community data and according to best planning practices in terms of how to apply that analysis. Next slide. So in conclusion, our final report is going to share the assessment of current conditions and trends of Chinatown, as well as the entire study area. we will present recommendations to support the study area, and we'll identify impacts of the arena on the study area. Finally, we'll make recommendations for interventions if the arena should be built. Next slide. And here we will again pause for our final Q&A portion. And again, the information that we are collecting from you all today is important to confirm that these are methods that you all feel will be effective in evaluating impact, to collect any feedback in terms of any gaps that you see are missing here, in which we will either try to meet those gaps and improve our methodology, or we'll address those limitations in the final report. We'll open it up to questions now.
Thank you, Sarah. So we have, you might have said this, but how did you decide which arenas to study?
Basically, we were looking for arenas in dense urban areas, similar to the Chinatown context. We also picked arenas that had gone through an environmental impact statement or an environmental review, because those arenas were the ones that had the most information about, had really analyzed what the potential temporary or permanent impacts might be. And also similar size, similar scale. Those were kind of the three major criteria.
Thank you. We had a question. How is the 676 cap possibilities included in the 2031 plus studies?
Sorry, I don't think I understand the question. Could you repeat that?
How is the 676 cap possibilities included in the studies?
Let's see. For our study, I don't believe it is a significant factor of analysis, except to note that in the future, there is this large project that will transform some of the existing challenges of the built environment.
Thank you. Another question. Would you expect Wash West and Chinatown to have the same community impacts if the arena is constructed?
I think it's really about the current conditions that we find. Based on what we've presented, the current conditions have some similarities, but also significant differences in terms of what's there, and also transportation and travel patterns will be an important component of the tipping points analysis. And so looking into the subgroups for Chinatown in particular, where we've been able to collect that data, we can really dive into where there are peak times that the arena has identified, where they might conflict with key travel times for particular subgroups, and where there's particular vulnerabilities for certain subgroups around arena assumptions. I don't know, Kay or Arthur, if you have any other thoughts on that response.
No, that's nothing to add right now, Sarah. Arthur, do you have anything?
No, none to add.
Someone asked if we're looking at possible positive impacts.
Yes, absolutely. On the systems approach side, there's certainly a lot of potential positive benefits to the arena, and especially in Washington Square West, the businesses in the Midtown Village focus group voiced a lot of those potential benefits.
There's a number of questions pertaining to the no build scenario. will you be assuming that recent trends will continue if the arena is not built? Another one here is, there's questions as to the future of the fashion district if the arena is not built. I think it's worth noting that um, if the arena is not built, it's the fashion district is a very expensive site to demolish and redevelop. So the building form would probably remain. The specific uses and mix of tenants and branding and things like that would remain to be seen if the arena does not happen. Someone's asking how we will test our assumptions of the impact of safety. It says, I would argue more people increase safety, but your example assumed more pedestrians would decrease safety.
Yes, that's definitely the trickiest element to measure in terms of the tipping points approach. I think our analysis there is going to be very qualitative because safety is so is so based on perception, and perception is so determinant on the culture and individual. We will use what we've learned about particular groups that feel like they have safety concerns based on the assumptions of the project. And what feels unsafe for one group might not feel unsafe for another group.
Thank you. There's a question, I think. Much like your plan to compare EISs, could you also assess comparable community impact studies done in the other 3 cities?
I don't totally understand the question, but we've analyzed the environmental impact statements of the arenas and their impact on their existing communities and surrounding areas. I also noticed another question in the chat about the tipping points being subjective. It is really tricky to analyze neighborhood character or community character. We followed guidance that the New York City environmental quality review process uses for analyzing neighborhood character. And it actually relies on when there is an impact in a technical area like traffic or noise or vibrations, or a major economic impact, then there is further analysis as to the impact of that technical area on the entire community. So in some ways, the tipping point analysis kind of follows that approach, because in the other benchmark studies or case studies, we saw that things like traffic, construction impacts, and small business impacts were actually subject to further analysis and were often areas and themes where there was significant impact. I don't know if that's clear, but so the tipping points are in some ways very related to what we saw in the case studies, or what we are seeing in the case studies that we're looking at.
Well,
Okay,
we did get one comment that says, no question, just thanks for your work and your patience. You're doing an excellent job studying the qualitative and quantitative effects. Oh, thanks.
thanks for
We
sharing
needed
that.
Yeah.
On the tipping points question, I will note that we are looking at, based on the rich data that we've collected in Chinatown in particular, we're looking at the conflicting travel times and travel modes for particular community subgroups against the peak hours that the arena has assumed for its events.
Thank you. Has the study considered impact on other adjacent neighborhoods or Independence National Park?
No, it has not.
Are you including the impact of the proposed housing units or just the arena? The area is already getting very dense from a housing perspective.
We did pull statistics from historic statistics on housing development, and yes, that is what we are seeing as well. The population is growing, and there's an increase in housing units. So we're looking at that background trend in the context of the additional units that would come online through the project.
We have a question about the arena in Washington, D.C. and how it impacted the Chinatown there.
We are in the midst of sort of drafting our findings for that, and I'm sorry that today's meeting isn't focusing on that. But yes, we are. That is one of the reasons that we also picked that arena study, was because it was proximate to a historic Chinatown, in addition to the fact that it had the environmental impact statement.
Thank you. In that vein, we had a question of what are the next steps.
The team will be completing the impact analysis over the rest of the year, and then we will provide the final report to the city.
Will you be analyzing business growth in the cities with existing arenas? For example, were most new businesses that occurred because of development arenas small businesses or national chains?
As a part of the case studies, we did look at their environmental impact statements chapters on the impact the arena had both during construction and on a permanent basis to the surrounding business community. But usually the study area wasn't the entire cities that the arena sat in, but more of like approximate neighborhood geography.
There's a question here. Will there be a final presentation to the community? The answer to that question is probably not. However, the full report will be released to the public when it's completed. There's a question here. I'm unsure of what they're asking. It says, are you asking if there's not an arena, what would the solutions be? Is this being asked of the community?
I think that question was from the first section, or the section about Washington Square West, and what kinds of feedback we were looking for was what we were looking for was whether the description of the existing conditions and current trends felt accurate to the Washington Square West and Market East community. So that was what we were asking then.
There's a question about the full report in languages other than English. I know that there will be an executive summary in multiple languages. Tonight's slides will be released in languages other than English. I don't know if I can promise at this juncture if the entire report will be translated, but at least parts of it will be. There's a few more questions in the chat. I'm not sure if we can provide answers right now. Any of the questions in the chat that we did not answer, we will respond with written questions, with written answers to everyone who registered for this meeting.
There's a question from Jeff from the Inquirer
Yes.
around, I think the question is what we'll be able to conclude in our report about whether we'll make a recommendation for or against the project. I think that's what that one is important. It's a more nuanced answer. We'll be making conclusions around the impacts of the arena to these neighborhoods within the study area. And depending on the different approaches that we're using, in some cases, we'll be able to come to stronger conclusions than others. Some places, some conclusions will be more high level than others. And just to reiterate what we've been saying in our responses, this is not an environmental impact assessment. And so this methodology is a customized approach, which not replace an EIS. However, we think it will still provide value to the decision makers around the impact. Kay, is there anything you want to add to that from the BJH side?
No, thank you. I think that's a good summary and accurate about what we're producing.
Okay, well, if there aren't any other questions for us, I do appreciate everybody taking the time to come on, and especially those who participated in our data collection efforts. I understand this is a really important issue for all of the neighborhoods that are adjacent to the arena, whether they're in the study area or not. You should certainly continue to please keep engaged and please be on the lookout for the final report. Thank you.
Thank you.
And with that,
questions that were not answered, we'll write up answers and get them to everyone who registered for this meeting.
and with that, Ian, shall we wish everyone good night?
Yes, thank you for attending. I know it's late. It's been an hour and a half, so thank you for hanging around this whole time.
Thank you.